Everyone tells you to face your shadow, but no one tells you what happens after. No one warns you about the emptiness that follows, the numbness, the hollow ache that settles in your chest when you realize you've done everything right and you still don't feel like yourself. You thought doing the work would set you free. You thought breaking open would lead to breakthrough, that crying would lead to clarity, that facing your demons would finally give you peace. But now you don't even feel like yourself. You look in a mirror and see a stranger. You wake up each morning and don't know what you want, what you need, or who you're supposed to be without all the stories you used to tell yourself. This isn't failure. This is the test no one prepared you for. And this time, it's not about surviving your wounds. It's about surviving your truth. It's about learning to breathe in the space between who you were and who you're becoming, even when that space feels like drowning. So here you are, sitting in the aftermath of your own awakening. You've done what few people have the courage to do. You looked into your own darkness, not to judge it, not to shame it, but to understand it. You peeled away the layers of conditioning, the masks you wore to work, the personality you performed for your family, the carefully constructed stories that made you lovable but never real. You shattered the mirror that reflected only the version of you crafted to please others, to succeed in a world that rewarded performance over presence, productivity over authenticity. You said no to the life that looked good on paper but felt empty in your bones. And now you're sitting alone in the silence that follows liberation. And it doesn't feel like freedom. It doesn't feel like the spiritual awakening you read about in books or saw in Instagram posts. It feels like you've lost everything, including yourself. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who first mapped the hidden territories of the unconscious mind, once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He understood that true psychological development requires us to face what we've spent our entire lives running from. But what Jung didn't say outright, what no one tells you when you first begin this journey, is that the most excruciating part of awakening isn't the breaking down. It's not the night you finally admit your marriage is over, or the moment you realize your career has been slowly killing your soul, or the day you acknowledge that the person you've been pretending to be isn't actually you. The most painful part is what comes after the breaking, when the old self is gone, dissolved, unrecognizable in the mirror. When you've stripped away everything that felt false, but haven't yet discovered what feels true. When the new you hasn't yet emerged from the ashes of who you used to be. You're in what I call the liminal space, the threshold between death and rebirth. And it's terrifying because it feels like nothing at all. Like you've erased yourself completely and forgotten to write a new story. If you're here right now, in that raw, unspectacular, profoundly uncomfortable middle, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not doing it wrong. You're exactly where every person who has ever truly transformed has found themselves. In the void between old and new, holding nothing but the faint promise that something authentic is trying to be born. You thought shadow work would be loud, didn't you? And at first, the initial stages felt like a psychological earthquake. Rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades finally erupted. Tears you hadn't cried since childhood came pouring out in grocery store aisles and during lunch breaks. Memories you had buried so deep you forgot they existed came crashing back into your body like waves against a breaking shore. You felt everything. The anger at your parents for not seeing you. The grief over friendships that were built on who you pretended to be rather than who you actually were. The terror of realizing how much of your life had been spent performing rather than living. It felt like dying. And in the most literal sense, it was. The death of denial. The death of people-pleasing. The death of the carefully constructed persona you thought you needed to survive in a world that seemed to punish authenticity at every turn. But now, there's no noise, no breakdown, no dramatic revelation waiting around the corner. Just a stillness so thick it feels like suffocation. A quiet so profound it makes you question whether anything you experienced was real. You don't miss the chaos. That emotional whirlwind was exhausting. but you missed the clarity it brought. At least during the storm, you knew where you stood, even if it was in ruins. At least then, you felt something definitive. The pain had a purpose, a direction, a sense that you were moving toward something. Now, the silence is so loud it drowns out your intuition. You start to question everything again. Did I imagine all that pain? Was my old life really that bad? What if I've just made everything worse by stirring up all this psychological sediment? This is the stage where most people turn back. They run straight into the arms of familiar distractions. They dive headfirst into new relationships, new jobs, new cities, new spiritual practices, anything to avoid sitting with the discomfort of not knowing who they are. They spiritualize their bypassing, telling themselves they've done the work, and now they're choosing love over fear, when really they're just choosing comfort over truth. They meditate their way out of feeling. They manifest their way out of grieving. They love and light their way out of the messy, uncomfortable process of actual integration. Let me tell you about Sarah, 28 years old, marketing manager at a tech startup. The person everyone came to when they needed advice, comfort, or someone to organize the office birthday parties. She was the epitome of having it all together, until she didn't. Sarah spent 2 years in therapy, carefully peeling back layers of people-pleasing that went back to her childhood. She learned about attachment styles and trauma responses. She practiced setting boundaries and saying no. She quit the job that was slowly draining her life force and ended the relationship with a man who loved the version of her that never said what she really thought. I thought I was finally becoming myself, she told me during one of our conversations. I thought healing meant feeling better, clearer, more confident. I expected to wake up one day and just know who I was, but then came the quiet. Mornings where she'd wake up and not know what she wanted for breakfast, let alone what she wanted from her one precious life. Evenings where she'd sit on her couch, finally free from obligation for the first time in years, and feel absolutely nothing. It's like I excavated everything, she said, but I forgot to put anything back. I'm not the people pleaser anymore, but I don't know who I am instead. I'm just empty. This emptiness Sarah described isn't depression, though it can feel similar. It's not numbness, though it can appear that way from the outside. It's the space that opens up when you've removed everything that was false, but haven't yet discovered what's true. What if this discomfort isn't a setback, but a second doorway? What if healing isn't the end of pain, but the beginning of what I call truthful pain? The kind that no longer screams for attention or creates drama to avoid being felt. The kind that simply asks to be acknowledged, to be integrated into the wholeness of who you're becoming. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming who you truly are, separate from the expectations and projections of family, society, and culture. It's not a destination you arrive at after reading enough books or attending enough workshops. It's a continuous process of choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, your own voice over the chorus of voices telling you who you should be. And here's what no one tells you about individuation. The most difficult part isn't the dramatic breaking down of false selves. It's learning to live comfortably in the space where you haven't yet rebuilt. It's developing the capacity to be with yourself when you don't know who that self is anymore. Pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Feel the weight of your body in this chair, in this moment. Is this the space you've been living in? The one that feels like limbo, but might actually be sacred ground? Don't rush past this feeling. Let it be here with you. Here's the turning point that changes everything. When you finally stop trying to fix yourself and start allowing yourself to be seen, exactly as you are in this messy, unclear, beautifully human moment. You realize that the shadow isn't some monster lurking in the depths of your unconscious, waiting to possess you or destroy your life. It's not the repository of everything evil or shameful about yourself. That's the misconception that keeps people afraid of this work. The shadow, in Jung's revolutionary understanding, is simply the parts of yourself you've learned to hide, suppress, or deny, because they didn't fit into your family system, your social environment, or your own idealized image of who you should be. It's your anger when you were taught that nice girls don't get mad. Your sadness when you were told that boys don't cry. Your neediness when you learned that independence was the only way to be safe. Your wildness when you were trained to be appropriate, contained, manageable. It's your sexuality when you grew up in a household where bodies were shameful. Your ambition when you were raised to believe that wanting things was selfish. Your gentleness when you learned that the world would eat you alive if you didn't develop a thick skin. The shadow is the part of you that stayed awake when everything else shut down to survive. It's the keeper of your authentic desires, your honest feelings, your unfiltered reactions to a world that often demands you dilute yourself to fit in. And it's the only part of you brave enough to whisper, "This isn't who I am. This life, this role, this performance, it's not you." Think about Marcus, 31, first-generation college graduate, climbing the corporate ladder with the kind of determination that made his immigrant parents proud. Good grades, good job, good apartment in the right neighborhood, good girlfriend who looked perfect in family photos. Marcus had checked every box on the American Dream checklist. He was living the life his parents had sacrificed everything to give him access to. From the outside, he was winning. From the inside, he was drowning. "I kept waiting for the gratitude to kick in," he told me. "I had everything I thought I wanted. My parents were proud. My girlfriend was talking about marriage. My boss was hinting at a promotion. I should have been happy." But Marcus's shadow work revealed something that terrified him. He didn't want any of it. The success felt hollow. The relationship felt performative. The life he built was beautiful from the outside and completely empty on the inside. "I realized I'd been living someone else's dreams for so long. I didn't even know what mine looked like anymore," he said. "I was 31 years old, and I'd never asked myself what I actually enjoyed, what I actually valued, what I actually wanted for my one precious life." Marcus spent months in what felt like freefall, not knowing what he actually enjoyed reading versus what he thought he should enjoy, not knowing whether he wanted to travel or whether he just thought travel looked good on social media, not knowing if he loved his girlfriend or if he just loved the idea of being the kind of man who had a girlfriend like her. His friends thought he was having a midlife crisis 20 years early. His family worried he was throwing his life away, being ungrateful for opportunities they'd never had. His girlfriend accused him of being selfish, of suddenly changing the rules of their relationship. But Marcus wasn't falling apart. He was falling into himself. For the first time in his adult life, he was asking the question that terrifies most people. Who am I when I'm not trying to be anyone in particular? This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the individuation process. It's not about becoming someone new or better or more enlightened. It's about excavating who you've always been, underneath all the conditioning, all the shoulds, all the adaptive strategies you developed to survive and succeed in systems that may have never actually seen you. You survived the collapse of your false self. That alone is a monumental achievement that most people never attempt. Now you must survive the stillness that follows. Because it's in this space, this raw, unspectacular, profoundly uncomfortable middle, that your true wholeness is forged. Not in a moment of enlightenment or breakthrough. Not in a perfect journal entry or a transcendent therapy session. But in those quiet Tuesday mornings when you don't recognize your face in the mirror, but still choose not to look away. This is what it means to truly face your shadow. Not once, in a dramatic confrontation with your demons, but every single day after, when it no longer fights you because you've stopped fighting it. When it walks beside you as an ally rather than hiding in the corners as an enemy. Here's a question that might crack something open. What part of yourself have you been trying to fix, improve, or eliminate instead of understand? What would change if you saw that part as a guardian of something important rather than a problem to be solved? Write this down. Sit with it. Let it reveal something you didn't know you knew. So how do you actually survive this? This numb, sacred, uncomfortable space between who you were and who you're becoming? How do you live in the liminal without losing your mind? First, and this is crucial, you slow down. You stop chasing the next breakthrough, the next insight, the next level of healing or consciousness or self-improvement. You stop treating your inner life like a project to be optimized. You stop looking for signs that you're doing it right. You stop asking the universe for proof that this discomfort means something. You stop Googling how long does shadow work take, and stages of spiritual awakening, and what comes after ego death. Instead, you start listening, not to the voice that tells you to fix, improve, transcend, or optimize, but to the quieter voice underneath, the one that has been patiently waiting for you to stop making so much noise that you can finally hear it. This listening is a practice. It's not passive, it's the most active thing you can do. It requires you to eat slower, tasting your food instead of scrolling through your phone while you chew. It asks you to breathe deeper, feeling the air fill your lungs instead of rushing to the next task on your endless to-do list. It means crying without immediately reaching for analysis or meaning-making. Feeling angry without instantly transforming it into something more palatable. Experiencing longing without rushing to fulfill it or make it disappear. You give yourself permission to feel safe in confusion, to be okay with not knowing, to exist without a clear identity or purpose or 5-year plan, to be human instead of productive. That's where most people fail in this process. They confuse discomfort with regression. They think that feeling lost means they're moving backward, when actually it means the ego is finally dissolving enough for something truer to emerge. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that allows us to integrate opposites within ourselves, the light and the shadow, the known and the unknown, the person we were and the person we're becoming, the parts of us that want security and the parts that crave freedom. This transcendent function doesn't work through force or effort or spiritual bypassing. It works through what Jung called holding the tension, sitting with the discomfort of contradiction without rushing to resolve it into something neat and comprehensible. It's learning to be both strong and tender, both independent and interdependent, both grounded and expansive, both certain about your values and uncertain about your next steps. The soul you see doesn't yell. It doesn't create drama or crisis to get your attention. It doesn't speak in a language of urgency or emergency. It whispers, and it only speaks when you've finally stopped making so much noise trying to figure everything out. You start to hear it in the smallest moments. The way you naturally reach for a book instead of your phone when you're feeling unsettled. The way you instinctively step outside when the air changes before storm. The way you find yourself saying no to invitations that once would have felt mandatory, not because you have somewhere better to be, but because staying home feels like honoring something sacred in yourself. I'm still here, it says. I never left. You're not broken. You're remembering. And this remembering isn't dramatic. It's not Instagram worthy or easily reduced to a quote that fits in a social media caption. It's not a story you can easily tell at dinner parties because it's not a story at all. It's a feeling, a knowing, a coming home to yourself that happens in the most ordinary moments. It shows up when you no longer betray yourself in small ways. When you say no without guilt or lengthy explanations. When you sit with longing without immediately trying to fulfill it or make it go away. When you hold yourself through the ache of being human without demanding that it stop or mean something profound. Let me tell you about Elena, 33, who spent years in what she called spiritual achievement mode. Every retreat, workshop, ceremony, and healing modality that promised transformation. She became fluent in the language of consciousness and awakening, could speak knowledgeably about chakras and energetics and quantum healing. I was collecting insights like trophies, she realized. I could talk about shadow work and trauma healing and spiritual bypassing, but I wasn't actually changing. I was just getting better at talking about change. Elena had become addicted to the highs of breakthrough moments, the cathartic releases, the profound realizations, the sense of finally getting somewhere. But between the peaks, she felt empty, always searching for the next experience that would finally complete her transformation. It wasn't until she stopped trying to heal that she actually began healing. Not through doing more, but through allowing more. Allowing the sadness without spiritualizing it into a lesson. Allowing the anger without immediately transforming it into compassion. allowing the not knowing without filling it with borrowed wisdom from books and teachers. I thought wholeness would feel like confidence, she said, like finally having all the answers. But it actually feels like being okay with not being okay. It feels like being honest about what I don't know instead of pretending I've figured it out. If this part is hitting something deep in you, don't skip past it. Keep going. The next few minutes might feel like looking in a mirror, and that's exactly what needs to happen. Your willingness to stay with this discomfort is the doorway to everything you've been seeking. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are is not someone who overcame darkness once in a single heroic moment. You're not the protagonist of a transformation story that ends with you enlightened, healed, and living happily ever after. You're someone who can walk through uncertainty again and again without abandoning yourself this time. Someone who has learned that the goal isn't to feel good all the time, but to feel whole even when you don't feel good. You don't survive shadow work by conquering it, by defeating the uncomfortable parts of being human, by transcending your earthly struggles into some elevated state of consciousness. You survive it by learning to coexist with all of yourself, the light and the shadow, the clarity and the confusion, the strength and the tenderness, the knowing and the not knowing. Wholeness, you discover, is not the absence of brokenness. Wholeness is the presence of everything, the beauty and the mess, the love and the fear, the certainty and the doubt, all held within the container of your own radical acceptance. It's crying and laughing in the same breath. It's feeling empty, but still showing up for yourself. It's having nothing figured out, but being honest about it anyway. It's being tender with your own confusion instead of demanding clarity before you're ready for it. And when you stop pretending you have it all together, when you stop rushing toward the next version of yourself, when you stop hiding from the slow, uncomfortable truth of being human, something profound shifts. The stillness that once scared you starts to feel like home. Not because it's comfortable, it may never be comfortable, but because it's honest. Because in this space, you're no longer a prisoner of your own improvement project. You're no longer waiting to be good enough to belong to yourself. You already belong. You already are enough. The only thing left to do is learn to live like it. Elena's story didn't end with a dramatic awakening or a perfect life. It ended with something quieter and more radical. The ability to be with herself without needing to fix or change or improve anything. I used to wake up every morning with a mental to-do list of how to be better, she said. More grateful, more present, more healed, more conscious. Now I wake up and ask, what does this day need from me? And sometimes the answer is nothing. Sometimes the answer is just to be here exactly as I am. Marcus eventually left the corporate job, not in a blaze of rebellious glory, but quietly, with respect for the path that had brought him to himself. He started teaching pottery, something his hands had always loved, but his mind had dismissed as impractical. His parents worried, but they also saw something in his eyes they hadn't seen in years: peace. I'm not living some romantic fantasy of following my passion, he clarified. I'm just finally living my actual life instead of the life I thought I was supposed to want. Sarah learned to sit with the emptiness without trying to fill it. She discovered that the space she'd mistaken for nothingness was actually spaciousness. Room for whatever wanted to emerge naturally, without force or agenda. I thought I was supposed to know who I was by now, she said. But maybe the point isn't to know. Maybe the point is to be curious about who I am in each moment. To let myself surprise myself. Here's something to write about, slowly, without editing. Who would you be if you weren't trying to be anyone in particular? What would your life look like if you stopped performing growth and started simply living it? Write for 10 minutes without stopping. Let whatever comes up surprise you. The journey of facing your shadow isn't about reaching some final destination where you're perfectly integrated and always at peace. It's about developing the capacity to be with yourself, all of yourself, without running away. It's about learning that you can feel lost and still trust yourself. You can feel uncertain and still make decisions from your center. You can feel broken and still be whole. You cannot know what you're doing and still be doing exactly what you need to do. Because wholeness isn't a state you achieve, it's a practice you return to. It's the moment-by-moment choice to include rather than exclude, to embrace rather than reject, to make room for the fullness of your human experience without demanding that it be anything other than what it is. In those quiet moments when the old anxiety arises. What if I'm wasting my life? What if I'm behind? What if I never figure it out? You learn to respond with the tenderness of someone who knows that these fears are just more parts of you that need love, not elimination. You learn to say, it's okay to not know. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to be exactly where you are, even if it's not where you thought you'd be by now. So if you're sitting in that space right now, the one no one warned you about, the one that feels like emptiness but might actually be fullness, the one that looks like being lost but might actually be being found, this is your reminder. You're not behind some imaginary timeline of healing. You're not broken because you haven't arrived at some fantasy of enlightenment. You're not failing because you still feel human. You're becoming, not in the striving, effortful way you might have imagined, but in the patient, organic way that all real transformation happens. Like a tree growing roots deep underground long before any growth is visible above the surface. And if you keep going, not with force, but with honesty, not with perfection, but with presence, not with the need to get somewhere else, but with the willingness to be fully here. You won't just survive facing your shadow. You'll walk out of it finally whole, not because you've eliminated the uncomfortable parts of being human, but because you've learned to embrace them as essential pieces of the magnificent, complex, beautifully ordinary miracle of being alive. The shadow isn't your enemy. It never was. It's your forgotten ally. The part of you that kept your authenticity safe until you were brave enough to claim it. And integration isn't about making it disappear. It's about making room for all of you to exist, to be seen, to be honored as part of the sacred work of becoming yourself. If this journey resonates with something deep in you, I want to hear about it. Share your own experience with the space between who you were and who you're becoming. What have you discovered in the quiet after the storm? And if you're ready to dive deeper into this work of authentic becoming, subscribe and join this community of people choosing truth over comfort, wholeness over perfection. Remember, the darkness doesn't destroy you. Resisting it does. When you stop running and start listening, you don't just survive, you come home to yourself. And that homecoming isn't a destination. It's a way of traveling through this one precious life you've been given.